I'm Jerry Sargent and welcome to Cosmic Truth. In this show we're going to be talking to a number of individuals from across the globe, men and women, insiders that have stepped forwards to tell you, the human race, the truth. We're going to be discussing extraterrestrials, space programs, government issues. We're going to be taking you deep inside Area 51 for a grand tour. We're going to be talking about different levels of density, raising consciousness. We're going to be discussing the ascension process. We're going to be talking about so many different interesting and informative topics. We're going to be sharing information that you must know. Humanity needs to know this information because this information will set you free. In this episode, we're back with Trevor in his home. We're going to be discussing him being grounded as an RAF pilot because he had too many UFO sightings. We're going to be discussing this first Star Wars project, which Trevor worked in before it became HARP. We're going to be discussing Men in Black that turned up at Trevor's home, threatened him at gunpoint. We're going to understand why Trevor is giving us a full disclosure. It has to do with his wife and the abuse, the mental and spiritual abuse that she suffered, which has now put her into a wheelchair for the rest of her time on planet Earth. And various other interesting pieces of information that is going to literally blow your mind. If you saw any more UFO sightings, then they were going to decommission you or take you out of the RAF. Was it something like that? Is that what you told me?
I did. They just said that you've had too many sightings of this nature.
And why is that a problem?
They seem to think I've become a threat to national security because I'm like some kind of magnet attracting these machines, although I can assure you I'm not. But, that's what that kind of impression was the one that they gave you. And they say, well, we can't have this. This is irregular. Every time you go up in the air, they make it sound 10 times worse than it really is. Something out of about, in real terms, maybe 40, 50 flights, 4 cases, where some people in their career may have 300 flights, and nothing ever happens. So it's happening far too often for their likeness.
So it's like 10% of flights? Yeah,
and they said, no, we can't have this, we'll ground you. And that's why I didn't want to tell him, I wanted to keep flying, and they said, no more flying. That was my last fast jet flight.
And was that a classified flight too?
It became classified, yeah.
And what happened after that? Obviously they grounded you. What happened to you?
I went off the Special Forces flight at RAF Lynham, and it was in those days the SAS didn't have a flying unit of their own, but they were beginning, because the way the world was changing and the way their operations were changing, they were getting to the point where they needed airborne equipment and airborne help. They used the Hercules mainly to do high altitude parachute jumps into various tasks that they were given to perform, most of which are classified and secret. And we knew very little about their activities, where they were going, what they were up to.
And what was your role amongst this?
I was just an airload master on this aircraft. I wasn't flying.
Oh, what, sorry?
An airload master.
And what does that do? What's one of those do?
Just make sure the SAS men are safe in there. Tell them when to jump. Tell them when it's time to
Did that feel a bit boring after flying these fast jets around the skies? Dancing with UFOs and then coming to that? Yeah.
And I didn't put up with it for long. I got out when I could. I just did the rest of my 3 years, and they said, well, as long as you leave after 3 years, we can quash the other 3 years that you originally signed on for.
Okay.
And I had a long talk with them. Went down to Biggin Hill down in Kent, where they do air crew selection. I had an interview down there with a couple of officers, and also, again, a chap from the Ministry of Defence. In fact, there's 2 of them. So there's 4 of them behind the desk and me just sitting there in front of them being interviewed simultaneously by these people. in order to say, well, we think it's in our own interests, both yours and mine, that you should leave the RAF with an honorary discharge, providing you never talk about these incidents under any circumstances whatsoever.
Did you have to sign any documents?
Yes.
And what was in the documents? Any threats?
No. It's just
to say you keep your mouth shut.
a signing of authenticity of the reports that I filed on this last incident with the Phantom. The other incident reports I never saw again.
Okay.
And it was just the rest of it was just the Official Secrets Act, and you have to agree with them not to say anything, and I've just broken that. No.
So if we fast forward, I mean, what was the year? What were you talking about? The late 70s here?
No, it's 1984.
1984. So 1984, you're discharged.
Yeah.
You've signed the documents. You've left. Now you've got a background in electronics.
Yes.
And I know that you told me you were recruited into the Star Wars project, which was the original HARP project.
Yes.
So you worked in the Star Wars project. Then it was sold to the American government, which they continued in Area 51. After that period, you went off and you did some historian work, and then at a later date, 2008, you were pulled back in to an American airbase, which we'll talk about more in detail later on. But just to give people a bit of a background here, so you were taken to this Air Force base in America. From there you were taken to Area 51, you spent some time in Area 51, you met reptilians, Dracos, tall whites, a variety of species of different greys. After this, a number of other UFO sightings and regular UFO contact started, which is continued up to this present day.
Yes, it's still ongoing.
And just to come forward a few more years to the last couple of years, just to give people an idea, you've been threatened. You've had men in black come to your house, to your sheds. They've threatened you at gunpoint.
Well, that was in towards the end of 2008, after I returned from Hill. End of August, beginning of September, and it was just for 3-day visit as a guest of the 388 bomb group, who flew from Nethershall in England in World War II and targets with B-17s against Germany. And I've just been doing their history on the Aphrodite project, which was about flying B-17s packed with and laden with explosives.
So when you're a historian, the 20 years were kind of dedicated to the Aphrodite project?
Yes, it was. I've been in contact. I tracked down many veterans who worked on those projects, with both the 8th Air Force Aphrodite project and the US Navy Handbook project, which they used the same equipment, but it's just like a Navy version. And they were using Europe as a testing ground. They chose to use the V3 launch site in northern France, at Mimaiec, where they had the V3 rocket they were going to launch against London, the Germans. And they had various other V2 rocket missile silos in that area. They also had a place called Watton, which is where they made the liquid oxygen rocket fuel for these V2 rockets. So
this Aphrodite project, let's talk about this a bit later on, because this is a real detailed sort of part of this discussion.
Yeah,
you told me bits and bobs,
and
I know it's to do with extraterrestrial portals underneath the ground. You told me that where the planes had crash landed into the sea and gone to the seabed, and there was extraterrestrial portals where they were running.
No, not in Germany. That was just in Area 51.
Oh, that was in Area 51.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So I just want to give the people a bit of an idea of some of the threats that you've had, and to make it clear that what you're doing coming forward has been a big thing for you, because I know up until about a year or so ago you were actually thinking about committing suicide.
Yes, I was.
And that was because of the threats the threats that you've had. I mean, what kind of threats did you get?
It started after the visit, after we came back to England from Hill Air Force Base in Area 51. The first thing that starts off very lightly, you notice when you pick up your telephone, we have a telephone call, there's like a buzzing in the receiver. When you talk, when someone phones you up and you talk to them in a conversation, you hear an echo in your earpiece of the telephone, But all indications that you're being monitored. I had one of my laptops was completely filled with data, all classified data.
Where did it come from?
We don't know, we just know it's somewhere from the US military.
So one day you woke up and there was just loads of information on your laptop?
Well, it filled up to the point I did actually get access to some of it, but the second day it completely filled the computer, so you couldn't even, you just switched on the power and the computer just came up black screen, because there was no memory left in the computer.
So even be able to switch it on?
No, because you couldn't the operating system in the computer couldn't load because there wasn't anywhere in memory to put it. The memory was completely full.
Okay.
And what we did in the end, I just got a hammer and smashed it up and bought a new one.
How do you know there was classified data on it if you couldn't open it?
Well, because the day before, the computer wasn't completely filled. They did it over a period of 3 days. So
Who did it?
The first day, I didn't even notice it. The second day, I noticed it funny, it's running slow. And you started looking, what are all these files? And you started to open these files up just to see if they would open. And you were looking at things about the X-43, the X-37.
And what are they?
The X-37 turned out to be a launch vehicle which can stay, it says unmanned. It can go, it's launched mainly of a rocket from Vandenberg Air Force Base in Northern California. It orbits the Earth for a year, can carry a nuclear device, and it just orbits and can drop it whenever they want, on whoever they want.
So you had all this classified information.
Yeah.
How did it come onto your computer?
No idea.
No idea at all?
No.
And then shortly after that, you start getting all these funny phone calls.
Yeah, and you'd ring someone up, and then you'd just about get through, you get them to pick up the receiver at the other end, and then the line go dead. So they're preventing your calls, your personal private calls. And then you would find that you get an echo, so much, increasingly more out of synchronization with your speech. So you find you can't talk as like you're talking to yourself, and the other person on the other end can't hear what you're saying or what's going on, or your emails get redirected to somebody else and then get redirected back to you, so someone else has read your emails before you do. And you knew this was going on because when you tried to open the file, it wouldn't open cleanly. There's always some kind of thing you had to put in your own details, so they knew it was you before you'd open them. Where before you'd just open the files and they'd just open up like any other file or any other suite of software that you want to use to run the task on your computer, or like, say, an example, if you want to do word processing or something like that, do a text document, say. And
So you told me that people were turning up at your works.
yeah, they started ringing up at work at first and start saying, have you got so-and-so working for you, and what do they do, and what sort of job they got doing, and just asking lots and lots of information about you. So you thought, okay, I'll hand a notice in, leave and get a job elsewhere. So I was continually going from job to job.
So were they asked, they were telling your bosses, and your bosses were telling you that people have been phoning?
Yeah, and they were saying they're finding out. They did some research of their own, and they said they're finding out through your national insurance number. As soon as you pay tax, they know where you are.
Mm.
And so they kept going on and on until we started getting little visits in the street. Cars were following you around, people, what they call the men in black.
And you weren't being paranoid?
No, not to begin with. It seemed they would just look at you, and you look back and they look away, pretend to be doing something else. It was
Just subtle intimidation.
Playing mind games with you, basically. It's just that they could provoke you to do something or whatever. I don't know, we can only guess. But you'd look at them and they'd look away or pretend to be doing something else. But as soon as you took your attention from them, their attention was back on you.
And then one day you're in your garden shed. What happened then?
Had a surprise one Sunday afternoon. I got in there and there's a man already in there with a gun to my head. Smith & Wesson 45. And he said, you've got to stop what you're doing. I said, well, I'm not doing anything. Well, he said, you've been getting lots of classified information on your computer. Where are they coming from? I said, you tell me, because you're the people that are sending them to me. Oh, no, we're not. No, it's your imagination. You must stop doing what you're doing. There was no reference to Area 51, no reference to any of my background, no reference to anything. And
There was just one man in your shed?
yeah, just one.
And what did he look like?
He just looked like black suit, white shirt, black tie, black trousers, black shoes, with a gun.
How old was he?
And late 20s.
Okay.
Looked very fit, very healthy. He could have been a commando, or, you know, he looked like someone who was, from his build, you could see the muscles through the suit he was wearing. It was one of those very thin, summer-like suits that he had on. And so it was summertime, and, you know, you could tell that he wasn't playing games.
Was he serious when he spoke to you?
Oh yeah, very sharp.
Like threatening or subtle, calm, or?
No, it was imposing, like imposing all will upon you. It was very, almost like trying to put you under extreme pressure.
And how long did he stay for?
Maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
And how did the conversation go?
Just basically arguing with him and trying to twist your mind to say things that you haven't actually said. And he was wired, he had an earpiece in his left ear, and so you could probably assume from that the conversation was being monitored. So you have to think that, go through the training that I received when I was in the military. It just taught you not to panic, although you wanted to panic, you're panicking inside because you don't know what's going to happen. You know, and it's only just you've got your wife and your daughter in the house, and you're there, and other people next door in their garden haven't got a clue what's going on. And, you know, so it makes you wonder what these people are capable, because they are not bothered, you know, whether they put a bullet in you there and then, because if the shot would obviously be heard. He had a silencer on, so it might have been like a dull thud, you know, rather than a, you know, boom, you know.
Yeah.
So he had a noise suppressor, and also I think a suppressor on there to keep the muzzle velocity high, but the sound at a minimum.
So these people, whoever they are, the government, men in black, Illuminati, whatever we want to call them, agents of...
We don't know for sure.
Yeah, we don't know for sure.
We do just guess, so I was just a guess he was a man in black because he was just dressed in black.
Yeah.
The only thing white he had on was his shirt.
So whoever these people are, they've kind of ruined your life, haven't they?
Yes, my wife got very ill. And
what happened to your wife?
She got to the point where she started losing a lot of weight. I mean, you're talking about a normal, healthy woman, weighs about 10 stone.
Completely functional, everything's completely okay?
Fine.
Nothing wrong with it whatsoever?
I was working at the Lions Retirement Home, and I was telling my colleagues at work, so I'm worried about Christine because she's losing a lot of weight. They said, well, how much?
No psychological problems, nothing at all?
No, she hasn't got a history of any psychological or mental problems. And weight just shed off her, and it got to the point that she became very ill. And by this time we were getting a lot of trouble from neighbours, people who didn't even know us, and we often wondered why we couldn't understand her, what had we possibly done to these people. Why do they dislike us so much? Threatening behaviour, banging on the walls, morning, noon and night, and just general intimidation, which made her condition worse. And she just said she just totally lost her appetite, and she basically was starving.
What caused her to lose her appetite?
It was the stress, I think.
But before that, I mean, was there anything else? I mean, when we had a previous conversation, you mentioned something about bugs and...
Yeah, she was aware of all this happening as well. She got so she wouldn't use the telephone.
Okay.
And she'd just go around and talk to people or use a mobile.
So you think the stress of the whole situation
just built up,
completely demoralised her, weighed her down, and now she's in a wheelchair, is that right?
That's right, yes.
She's in a wheelchair, she can't eat.
No.
Even if she wanted to eat, she couldn't because the sarcophagus is completely gone.
Yeah, well, it's not completely gone, but there's blockages there. So the food can't go through the esophagus. You can swallow okay, but she can't get the food through the esophagus down into the stomach.
And what's
because
happened to the
there's
esophagus?
blockages. It just has blockages inside.
Like, what kind of blockages? Where do they come from?
It's the esophagus is actually narrowed, and it's normally, I think the hospital said, is about 28 millimetres hole where the food can go down into the stomach, and hers in places is down to 2 millimetres. So that's a lot. They call it a constriction of the esophagus.
Because you showed me pictures of you, your wife, your daughter at Hills Air Force Base, the time that you went to Area 51, and you gave the talk, etc., etc. And you all looked completely healthy, completely normal.
Yeah.
And that was only 2008, 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And obviously I've met your wife now, and you know she's not in the healthiest of ways.
No.
It's a huge, huge change.
Yeah.
So these guys have really kind of destroyed your life.
So I'm just her carer now, basically.
You're just a carer.
Yeah, I look after her. I became qualified and I worked at the lines, and a good job I did. So otherwise, she would be in hospice now.
How long ago was it you were thinking about committing suicide?
A couple of years ago.
What stopped you?
I got to a very low edge in my life, and I was worrying initially about, well, if I go and do this act, what's going to happen to my wife and daughter? That was the immediate response. That was concerned me more than anything. The actual point of doing it myself wasn't at that point a problem. I wasn't worried about it, but I was worried about what happened to them. What's going to happen to them? Christine can't look after herself. Lisa can't work and look after her mother too.
One or the other.
Yeah. So I thought, well, okay. I meditated about it, and what came through me through meditation was you're not thinking about your spiritual health. What you need to do is to look at other people's problems instead of your own. Try not to be so selfish. It would be very selfish to do this. It said to me, go on YouTube and look for people who've had near-death experiences. And that is what I began to do. And I came across this woman who shared her story on YouTube. She'd had all kinds of emotional and very negative problems, and worse than mine. She was in America, and she decided to shoot herself. And the story was, as she told it was, she put the gun to shoot the bullet through her heart. And when she decided this was it, I'm going to do it, and she put the gun to her heart, something made her move the gun slightly to one side, so the bullet would go through her but wouldn't touch the heart. Unknown to her at the time, she still thought believed that bullet was going to go through her heart. And she pulled the trigger, the gun went off, the bullet went right through her. She had a near-death experience. She was, obviously someone had heard the gunshot and dialed 911, the American emergency service, called for an ambulance. She was rushed to hospital, and she had, they tried to save her on the operating table, and she had died, in fact. She had looked down at her body and left, and she remembered going up through that tunnel we talked about earlier, and but she didn't have a life preserver, and she saw a light at the end of the tunnel, and this might be difficult to believe, but she said she saw Jesus, and Jesus said, "Come with me." He said, "I'll show you what heaven is like." And he took her up, and she saw a gate, and he said, "You can come through this gate, and you'll see people in heaven, but you can't talk to them, and they can't talk to you, because it's not your time to enter. If you go through that door, you can't come back, and you'll have to go to hell because you're not of a high enough vibration to come into heaven. Your negative thoughts of your suicide will prevent you from going to heaven. You'll cause chaos and turmoil here. So, but you can see what heaven is like, and see how those people are. You can go back to earth, and you can complete your life, as you were intended, and this is what's waiting for you. Just see it through and have trust in yourself. And then he said, I've got something to show you. And he took her from heaven back into that tunnel, and this time the tunnel was dark and she had a falling sensation, and she felt like she was falling, free fall, for a very, very long time, what seemed like almost an eternity. And she went into a place where there's a chamber, like inside of a cave, with a glowing orange light. And she could hear people screaming in terrible pain and suffering. And Jesus took her by the hand and said, I'm going to show you somebody. And they hovered in the air, and he flew over this fire pit, and sitting on like a globe in this fire pit was Satan. She looked down upon Satan and see him there, the goatee beard, and the two horns, the pointed tail, and the bat-like wings, and the hoof-like feet. He just sat there, took no notice, weren't bothered she was even there. And above him was a ring of square, clear cubes. And it was a bit like a wrap-round, multi-storey block of flats like you get in places like London or around the world. But they were clear and you could see who was in them. And she saw various beings from various different planets, different things. And then he said, I'm going to show you someone you recognise. And she showed him Adolf Hitler. And she could see Adolf Hitler and his torso up, same as all the other people and beings that she'd seen. And he looked just like his normal self when he was alive. And suddenly he'd begin to smoke. And then he'd begin to scream. And it's louder than the other screams that were around her at that time. And she could see his body begin to catch fire. And you see bits of flesh falling off his body, his arms, his body, his torso, his face. He'd lost his face, and you see all the bones and the muscle structure and the bones underneath. And then you see all the internal body organs all catch fire and fall away one by one. She can notice the lung, the heart, the liver, the kidney, and she's not even a doctor. But she knew what these organs were, and the skeleton just remained, and it just went a grey colour. And he stopped screaming, and then everything went quiet. There was a pause, and he came back to how he was before all this occurred, his normal self again, just from the torso up, all flesh and blood, a living, breathing creature. But he had a few short moments where he could stare up and see heaven, to see what heaven was like. And then the process would begin all over and over again, and that's what the torment. And when she could see the energy from these beings and Adolf Hitler feeding Satan down below, they were his food to keep him alive. And above them realms she could see the demons of the higher hierarchy, the most evil of the evil demons. And she could see the hierarchy below them, the lesser demons, and she could see them feeding off the energy of all the planets in the solar system, of a low vibration of various solar systems, including Earth. They were just feeding off all the negativeness of other people.
So this is a video you watched on YouTube, yeah?
Yeah.
A video you watched on YouTube.
But I saw it visually in here.
So you saw it at the same time as she was explaining it?
Exactly.
Okay. So do you believe this? Is this something that resonates with you?
I think it's real.
Yeah. What makes you think it's real?
Because she suddenly realised that the screams she'd heard at the beginning, when she just turned round that corner and floated up with Jesus, they weren't screaming out in agony, they were screaming for her to go away. Don't come here. And she saw a box, one of those clear boxes was in view, and it was open. And she was
trying to entice her.
She was being tempted to go inside the box. It was Satan was tempting her to go inside the box.
And what stopped her going inside the box? How were they tempting her?
Through the mind.
Okay.
Through the mind. He said, come to me, you have greatness. And he gave her visions of having these grand meals and being well cared for and having a lovely life with money and riches and wealth and all the things you'd expect to be tempted by the devil. And it was enticing. It was almost like that Pied Piper story where the pipe was playing music and his music enticed all the rats to follow him. Who led them to their deaths, and that's exactly what that reminded me of. And
so she decided not to go in the glass box, and what Jesus took her back again?
No, she panicked. She panicked. She cried out to Jesus, and Jesus said, "I've got to leave you now. Bye. I'm off." And he just floated up, and she was getting nearer and nearer to this open, like acrylic cell, box, cube, whatever you like to call it. It was just getting closer and closer, and there's nothing she could do to stop it. And the temptations were coming stronger as she got closer.
She got closer, yeah.
And she panicked and she cried out to Lord, "Lord, save me, Jesus, save me, Lord."
And then what happened?
Jesus' arms came down, both of his arms, but all she could see was his arms. Pulled her up, and she was back in that tunnel, this time with the light at the end of the tunnel. And then she's back in the room where they were desperately trying to save her life. And she went back into her body.
And that was it?
A changed person.
Okay.
And she survived, she got well, she's up about today and she's happy. And
have you ever had any other experiences to do with the devil, to do with hell, heaven?
I have had experiences where I've been meditating, and I had a period where we were very short on money. And I started meditating to try and recognise ways of improving our position at that time. And I had a demon come to me, one of the lower demons, and he said, "We can help each other. I want to go back to the fourth dimension so I can reincarnate into the third. Maybe if I can show you ways of getting a little extra cash, that will help me to show that I'm doing some good, and then I can be rewarded, give my 10%, because as you know, all businesses know if they give 10%, then their business has got a good chance of being rewarded with success. Every businessman knows that, and that's what this position was teaching him.
Yeah. I mean, this rings very true to me, because as you know, I've got a healing business, Star Magic.
Yes.
And we have a lot of clients, people that we work with that have done deals with entities, what I call shadow parasites.
Yes.
And for someone to have a shadow parasite accessing them internally or working remotely, they must have done some kind of deal with them, entered into some kind of karmic contract. And I know that it always happens in a state of fear, on a low vibration, just like you're saying. You know, you're looking for money, you're trying to get yourself out of this position, and they're offering you the opportunity.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming you turned this opportunity down.
No, I didn't.
You didn't?
I took it.
Okay.
And it was for... there's two ways you can do this. You can have anything you want, wealth, riches. Just name what you want in money, as much money as you want. I said no. I'm sorry, I just want enough so I can get by, pay the bills, feed ourselves. I ask for nothing more and nothing less. They said, well, we can do that. And when I came out of meditation about a week or so later, things changed for us and we was able to get a few extra hours of work, which made that difference, the difference I was looking for.
And in return, what have you had to give them?
In return for him doing that, he was allowed to give me something. So in return, what I gave back to him was the ability. He said, I've now only got 700 years to go. Then I can go back to the fourth dimension and I can be reincarnated. I had 900 years to go. I've now lost 200 years. It's a percentage, a 10% percentage of what you gave me, and then you've given, well, I've given to him, because you've done something kind.
Okay.
And I wasn't greedy, and he wasn't greedy, so it took some time off the time he needed to be a demon before he can go back to the fourth dimension.
And this is 700 Earth years?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's still a long time, but
It's,
really
it's
a
lost
blip.
200 years, so that's good.
Yeah, okay.
You know, it's an improvement over what he
And
had.
where was this demon? In hell?
Yes.
Okay. So when demons are in hell, they can still communicate with other beings on
Yes.
other planets, as long as they're open to this communication.
Yes.
Or maybe they might work with them subconsciously. Is that a possibility?
Yes. Yes, I believe it is, Jerry.
Okay.
Yes, I really do.
Okay, so if we go back to the point when you came out of the RAF, you got decommissioned, and you've got a better background in electronics. Tell us a bit more about the background in electronics, because you've fascinated me. Things you've told me, you've shown me diagrams of spacecrafts, how they work, how they take off, how they travel through time and space, light years and light years. You know, how humans can get from one point in space-time to another and back again without dying, because it is so many light years away. I mean, you know all about this stuff.
Well, I don't know everything, Jerry, but I know I've been blessed with the knowledge to have
You know
a little bit about it.
Okay. I think you're being really humble there. But anyway, you know a lot. I mean, the stuff that you showed me is incredible. So how did you get this information, and how long did it take you to get this information? Where does it come from? How did this background in electronics, where did it come from?
My father had a book. He had it as a Christmas present from his grandfather, which had been my great-grandfather, in 1937. And it's called The Boy's Book of Electricity. And in that book had all kinds of different things you could build. It was a practical book. You could build electronic experiments, and one was an induction coil.
What fascinates me is you got taken into this Star Wars project, which was the original HARP project. And for people that don't know, that is where they control the weather, they control volcanoes, earthquakes, all of these things. Is that right?
Yeah, but that was where the interest came from initially.
Because they don't just invite anyone into these types of projects, do they? You've got to be extremely knowledgeable in this quantum world with electromagnetics, electromagnetic energy, particles, atoms. You know this stuff. So you must have got a really vast knowledge from somewhere, not just a few books.
Well, it built on that. I began to go to museums a lot, and I learned everything I could learn from museums on high voltage electricity. That was my main interest. I learned about the work of James Watt, Michael Faraday, all the great electricians and experimenters with electrical magnetism. There's another thing I was interested in, electromagnets and high voltage currents and high amperage currents, and how they could be manipulated and used to do many wonderful things. And then I began to read the work of Nikola Tesla. Studied his work, I read all 500 odd patents that he had in his lifetime, and just absorbed as much knowledge as I could, and did the best I could with maths and physics, and got myself through university, and began to understand a little bit about quantum mechanics and the way electrons work, and how you have hydrogen with a single electron. That electron in certain conditions can split into two electrons, and so on, so forth. You get the next element that goes on and on and on until you get all the elements that are known, and even some elements that are not known in this world. It's just a question of how the electrons can split and produce a new element. That interested me.
How did the military know that you had such knowledge?
Because when I applied to go in the RAF, I needed a science background to become a pilot. And that was one of the qualifications I had with me. And so they knew that I had some knowledge, an electrical background. All the anti-gravity stuff came much, much later. It was beyond knowledge. It was just interested in very large capacitors, how capacitors work, how you can store a large charge of electricity.
So where did all the anti-gravity knowledge come from?
Came from up there.
So
my little friends.
So you were communicating with who?
Several races with the Arcturians.
Whenever I speak to you and we communicate about Arcturians, it always brings real deep emotions within you. Why is that?
It's because people are going to think I'm crazy.
No one's going to think you're crazy.
I'm 10% Arcturian.
10% Arcturian.
I'm a hybrid.
A hybrid.
That's what I learned.
Okay.
That's why I think the way I do.
Okay. Because when I sit here in this space with you, love just oozes from your soul. You know, you can feel extremely high vibration being in this space with you.
Thank you.
And I know, I mean, just for everyone like that's watching this video, what fascinated me when you very first emailed me was the fact that you mentioned a certain planet.
Yeah.
And that planet was Bevricon.
Yeah.
For you guys like watching at home, 2 years ago, I was sat at my computer and I was just staring into my computer screen, and then the next thing, I've just travelled out of my body and I've ended up on another planet. And I met the beings there. There were children that I met first with crystals hovering in front of their third eyes. They had halos around their heads, and the children took me to meet this, what I deem as a beautiful woman with long kind of gingery golden hair, and she told me her name was Gian Treva, and she showed me many different things. And this planet, I was told, was called Bevricon, but I could never really work out where it was. And I travelled back there several times, just kind of spontaneously. I was just taken there. I never intended to go there. I was just taken there at certain times. And when Trevor emailed me for the first time, he mentioned this planet Bevricon and told me that it was in the Boots constellation and it was so many light years away, etc., etc. And he told me that he'd been there, met his Arcturian mother, and he even bought a crystal back from that planet, which he actually gave to me as a present. I'm actually holding it in my hand, the little octahedron crystal that was brought back from this planet by Trevor. And that is really what kind of sparked my interest to really want to communicate with you, because I'd never spoke to anyone that had heard of Bevricon before.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was thinking, you know, I kind of knew and trusted this was real, but when you've got no one else to share it with, you see all these other planets, all these other star systems that people talk about. No one ever talks about Bevricon.
No.
Why don't people talk about Bevricon or know about Bevricon?
Because it hasn't been discovered yet by Earth.
Why is that?
Well, at the moment, on Earth, many scientists and astrophysicists are busy studying stars more closely, because the technology to look for wobbles of the star is now advanced enough so they can detect stars wobbling. And that wobbling is caused by planets orbiting that star. And in the case of Arcturian, because it's a red giant, it's more difficult to see the planets because the brightness from the star, even though it's between 34.6 and 39.9 light years away, the variation in distance is because of the way our solar system and that solar system of Arcturian system move. As they move through this galaxy, they move apart and then together, like many stars do. Many people are not aware of this. It's still to be learned by scientists here on Earth.
So is it in a different light spectrum?
Yes, you still see it with visible light, but if you was to walk on the surface, you would be limited with the amount of colours that you could see. The average Arcturian can see 48 billion different colours.
And how many colours can a human see?
I think it's about 32 million.
32 million?
Yeah.
But an Arcturian is 42 billion?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Even being a human being, I didn't realise that our colour spectrum was so vast. I mean, 32 million still seems like
it's a huge
an extensive range of colour.
But you're dealing with the actual visibility and clarity would be the same, although because our atmosphere is no pollution, it will be clearer than it is on Earth. But the thing you've got to look with the amounts of different colours, but you're seeing just more shades of each colour. More shades will be apparent to you. You can able to detect more finer shades of that particular colour, like the colour red, for instance, or the colour orange. You would just see more shades of that colour. Your eyes will be able to detect more colour, more shades of colour in that particular colour spectrum.
Whenever I've remote viewed or had experiences in other spaces, densities, I've always seen the colours as very translucent. So instead of seeing a thick orange, you'd see a really high vibrational orange that was almost transparent, translucent, and colours that kind of varied in the spectrum around that.
Yeah.
And that's what it's like in these other spaces. high vibrational colours.
Yes, they are. That's why you can see more of them and more shades. But you have to remember, when you remote view, you're there in a sense, and in a sense you're not there, because you're in between dimensions. So you're not fully in the fifth dimension, but you haven't fully left the third dimension. You've got them congealed together, and you've got like a dimensional fog. And that's why those colours seem to blend into each other. Like you find the colours blend when you see them, when you look around. It's not quite as clear a vision as you would if you were physically there in your body.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean to say because you are there and the experiences you have there are real, but it's just because of the limitations of the third dimensional reality that we're all in. It limitates us to a great, great deal. And so when you look at something in a higher dimension, there is a dimensional fog, because you're looking into something lighter, something more clearer. But the fog from the third dimension that you're taking a part of it with you to a certain extent. It creates a fog and clouds your vision because you lose some of the clarity, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
These episodes with Trevor are amazing. They are just so informative, and they are blowing my mind more and more. I'm so happy, I'm so glad that you're here with me in this space with Trevor, tuning into this information. I'm so grateful to Trevor for opening his heart and pouring his soul out and sharing with us, with you, with me, with the entire human race, the truth about these men in black that turned up at his home and threatened him at gunpoint, being an RAF pilot and not allowed to do the job that you so love, working in the first Star Wars project before it became HARP. I mean, Trevor has seen so much, and we're sharing it here with you on The Cosmic Truth. Yes, thank you so much for tuning in once again to this episode of The Cosmic Truth. These messages are so important. Why? Because they set you free. Knowledge, truth, wisdom. It's inside your own cosmic heart. It's deep within you. All we're doing with these shows is triggering information, light, frequency, vibration that you already know. Join us on next week's episode of Cosmic Truth so you can continue to unfold, expand, explore the depths of your own cosmic heart where all the truth lies.